Well, now I want to turn to Steve Sherrill for our
Oh,
segment on what do you want to talk about? So, Mr.
yeah,
Sherrill, welcome.
let's talk about that jute, and Z scale.
All right.
Uh, Now, what I want to talk about is planning a train meet. But before I do that, I want to say hi to Bill Opperman. And Bill, if you can get on here, it's been 30 years since I talked to Bill Opperman. And I see he's on here. So, hi, Bill. You're on
You're
mute.
muted.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen you, Bill. Hi.
Let's see, unmute. How's that?
You got
You're
you.
great.
Well,
You're great.
lot of water over the dam and under the bridge since I used to come up to your house and named you as being the first rail baron. Um,
West Virginia.
in the interim, I'm now in Katy, Texas, trying to move up to Hyco, Texas. Finally got my son got the house done up there that got me to come to Texas. So I wound up in a senior citizen apartment complex. And, my dream layout in the 20-foot container and all of that is still out there on the horizon. So anyway, I've enjoyed what I've seen tonight. Had the management of this senior citizen complex fed us dinner tonight, so I was a little late getting on, but
A lot of
what I'm seeing.
a lot of complexes have train clubs in the complex. Are you in one of those?
Not in this complex. There's no train club.
Okay.
No, we have a morning coffee clutch. Almost everybody is an Air Force veteran. Of course, I'm a Marine and Army, and that's like I say, I'm surrounded by the chair force. But no, it's a nice place, but it wasn't how I wound up or how I planned on winding up spending my days. But there is. I was over at Paul Sazak's for an open house the other day. I don't know if you might have seen some of his stuff. Narrow gauge layout, 2 upstairs bedrooms. He's computerized it and automated it, and it's kind of here you got this narrow gauge logging and mining railroad that's fully automated, and just kind of the incongruity of it. But he does great workmanship. Used to be good hobby shops down here. Now Papa Ben's is I probably got more trains out in my storeroom than they've got.
I think Bill, if you look and see, there's a few people who are on new tracks from the old Kimberton days. So, maybe you can make a connection with some of those guys, and it's good to see.
I've Pete Lynch, his ON30 Maine Railroad. I visited him, 3 years ago, and now I live. It's 10 miles and a half hour to his place. That he's selling the house and moving into a senior citizen complex. So he's changing that up. But there's guys down here that I know, and then there's a bunch of guys that I knew that are all dead now. So it's it's few and far between some days. But
yeah, we've lost quite a few. Okay,
yeah.
Now let me.
Okay, sorry to ramble on. But
Yeah, that's okay. Hey, when we finish here, we have a little after the show. Okay, we get talk. So hang around after that.
okay.
What I want to talk tonight is how you plan a train meet. Okay, now I'm in the process of holding one, and it's going to be in January the 18th. And some of the problems that I ran into were obviously there are certain things you have to do when you plan one of these meets. This isn't the first one that I planned. I had about 10 or 11 from 2006 until 2011 or 12. But what you need to do, you need to have a date that you want to do it. You need to have a location and a time. You need to have a theme if it's possible, like this is a micro meet and a small layout meet. So we have certain restrictions as far as the size of these mini layouts, and no restriction on the micro layouts, except they should have movement. We don't want just dioramas. And we need a couple of contact people that participants can contact to get information. So we've got this going on, and it's going to be, like I said, January the 18th, which is a Saturday, and 2025, and everything is free. All you have to do is kind of register that you're going to have a diorama or a mini micro, and that's so we can see how much space we have. It looks like we're going to have a really nice turnout, and I'll be taking pictures and sharing them. Right now, I've got 4 or 5 of these micros that I'm doing. If anybody has any kind of a question on a micro layout build, I can probably help you a little bit on that, as I have some experience. I'm right now building I've got 2 ON30s, 1 ON18, a Z-scale, and a Thomas the Tank Engine, which is kind of interesting. All different. So I just, does anybody have any questions on anything like that? And I have a question for Ed O'Rourke. Ed, if you're still on here, I got a question for you. You may cover this at a later date, but Ed, are you still here?
Yep.
Okay. I have one question. I know when I rebuilt or moved and built another layout, I had to make a decision of when to change from DC block control to DCC. Are you going to be covering something like that in your upcoming segments? If not, how did you come to that decision? Because, I had early on, I went to DCC right away.
Yeah. I got into it fairly early. And I'll tell you what, trying to model the New Haven with the electrics and diesels and things, when you couldn't bring 2 things together, or run, 2 powered PAs back to back or something, that was very difficult. So having DCC made that easy. At one point, I was considering powering the catenary so I could run the electrics on that, and the diesels and the steam on the two rail. Thank God I didn't have to do that, because that would be an electrical nightmare, I think.
Did you have any to programming?
Yeah, I do some. I do it through JMRI, what I have to do. But what was then the hobby shop here got in. They were early proponents of Digitrax, so I got into Digitrax along with there's 3 or 4 other guys who were doing the same, so we all kind of got into it at the same time, and it just kind of went from there. With nowadays, we've got the other guys, which I've forgotten now, from out in Rochester. NCE is over in Rochester, and a lot of the guys have adopted that. And I think if I was doing it again, that's the way I would go, because NCE seems to be a little more user friendly, I think. But I've got too much invested in Digitrax now to change. So I've been probably doing it for at least since the early 90s, I think. Yeah,
I would Digitrax, and it was very hard for me to program and things like that. So later I went to Lintz, which was much easier. And then I went to battery power, and that's by far the easiest of any of it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But that was just one of the things you run into, and I know you're going to talk about things like this when you decide to go from one layout to a brand new layout.
Well, I retrofitted the original layout for Digitrax. You know, I just wired it into one cab of the cab control. And I was originally going to, you know, use one as DC and one as DCC, but once you get started with DCC, I just kind of went with it. In the old days, you had to wire them all in by hand. Now you, you know, you buy it, it's already got the DCC all installed and everything, so there's nothing to it. All you got to do is program the address into it, and
Yeah,
it's great. Yeah.
Dead rails the way to
Wiring
go.
up some of the older brass was interesting, because if you want New Haven electrics, you almost have to have brass. Wiring some of those up for DCC was exciting, I will say.
Well, it was a godsend when we started getting stuff that was DCC ready.
Yeah.
You know, that was great. But before that, block control was always, you were saying, who's got my block? Who's got my block? And you remember those days, right?
We got one fellow whose layout we operate on. He's 85. His layout's been there 40 years. It's DC. It's old school. Each panel's got a rheostat on it. He's got the probe to throw the switches. All the switches are power routing, and it's a lot of fun to run, but it's definitely old school, you know.
Well, this is one of the
He's
things.
an electrical engineer, so he knew what he was doing with it.
Yeah, this is one of the problems that I'm going to be running into with converting part of my railroad to ON18 is, you know, stuff's very small.
Yeah.
I think I can battery power it. I'm working on it. I think I can do it. If I can do it, it'd be no problem. Otherwise, I'm going to have to DCC something or stay DC. But again, you won't need many engines, so maybe you can get away with it, you know. Anybody else have any input on DCC as far as when they changed over? I know that there was a lot of the old guys said, that's not for us. We're going to stay DC and block control. They fought it for a while.
Yeah. Well, that's what Marty, my friend, said. He's got too many locos to try and wire them up to convert it to DC, and it'd be a job to convert the layout. I don't know if he could do it. But it runs great. It's a lot of fun. Tell you the truth. Yeah.
I never had any trouble with it operating. I had good operation the entire time. You know, that was not the problem. It was just I got tired of cleaning track and not being able to program properly.
Oh yeah.
Boy, that was a nightmare, you know, for me.
Steve, you talk about that stuff in the quote early days of DCC. I built my layout in 93 and 94 when it was Digitrax was just starting to come on board, but I was already familiar with it from our club layout. We had the old Dynatrol analog control system where you had a plug for each locomotive and you plugged it in the throttle and it communicated with that locomotive. It wasn't digital and it wasn't perfect, but it worked. So I was already familiar with the concept, and the DCC portion of it, the digital portion of it, just made it seem easier at the time when I was putting it in. But we were still having to hardwire the decoders into the locomotives and stuff like that.
Well, you had CTC 16 or something, didn't you, over there for a while?
We had something before Dynatrol, but I don't remember what it's called. Might have been that. It didn't work as good as the Dynatrol did. Yeah,
well, you know, I think that DCC is nice, but I'm too old to get underneath the layout to wire that stuff up.
That too, yeah. You can get under there okay. It's getting back out that's the problem usually.
Like you said about under the
that's
step.
the trouble. Yeah. I don't have any trouble getting down on the floor. It's getting back up off the floor.
You can do that when you're 50, but boy, when you get to be 80, you say,
Steve and Ed, is there a cutoff of the amount of locomotives, you know, give or take, that you would say you're going to run consistently, where you would maybe say you would prefer to go to DC? And how many do you think, or what type of operations do you think would make that cutoff to where it's better to go DCC, as me being a newcomer and, you know, kind of starting to plan out my layout now, and I'm basically just going to run subway system cars. Is there a cutoff to where you think, or is there a situation where you think DC is favorable over DCC for somebody that's starting to build a layout with very few running trains? Is that is there a better or worse, or?
Doc, I would say that what you need to do is to see how many trains you're going to run at one time. Okay,
I would say it'd be 4 would be probably the max.
I would say that you should go to DCC, especially if they're already wired, ready for DCC. You know, and it's really hard to buy something new that's not DCC ready or DCC equipped.
Yeah, and the wiring is much easier for DCC. You don't have to,
Right.
you don't have to get stuff into blocks and insulate this, isolate that, and have switches to control, turn this one on and off and everything. I think if you got more than one loco you're trying to run at the same time, you're better off with DCC than you are trying to do it with DC, I think. If you're starting,
So essentially,
going into it,
there's not really, well, there's not really any significant advantage of running DC unless you're, I mean, not to sound odd about this, but just basically running a train around a Christmas tree. You know, if you're just running a train around a loop, really no advantage of running DC.
Yeah, I mean, if you're running one train, even if you've got a branch line and you want to train out and a train back or something, you know, with one loco, maybe that would be cheaper,
you know,
certainly.
Think about it. It's very analogous to the actual railroad, right?
Right.
When the railroads built their first railroad, when you built your first narrow gauge railroad to connect to the main line, you bought one engine. You didn't need to do anything to control what was happening on the railroad. That's DC. The minute you add the second locomotive, you've got to have a way that the engines don't occupy the same space. And DC is the same thing. You start breaking things up into blocks. And the more blocks you have and the more locomotives you have, the more complex it gets. The beauty of DCC is it actually takes away most of that complexity.
Yeah.
So, you know, the only people really who I find are not going to DCC are people who have a large number of old DC locomotives or who've built a layout many years ago that's wired for DC and have DC locomotives and are comfortable with it. I think anybody building a layout in the last 10 to 15 years has probably gone to DC. I mean, like you said, once they go past the single train running around a loop.
Yeah, I think you're right.